All right, I'm recording now. So here's what I was talking about is that usually we show our faces in the very beginning, just so that you can see who we are and can see our faces. So hello. And after that, I'm going to mute my video. And I'll be honest with you, I will be muting my video because you really don't want to see the weird faces I make when I'm running a webinar in which I'm looking to see, ooh, is this showing here? And all of a sudden there's like this big face in front of the screen, which would also be distracting. So that's why we turn it off. And with that said, I am going to mute my camera now. If I can figure out how to do that. Yes, I did it. Yay. Okay, so welcome to Employee Engagement and Culture. We're delighted that you're here. My name is Chris Wildermuth. I'm an associate professor at Drake University, and I would like to welcome alumni and students from Drake University from the Master of Science in Leadership Development. We always have quite a few people in the group who come from that population. Also, we're in Des Moines, Iowa, so many times we have Iowan Society for Human Resource Management participants, and also, please, a big warm welcome to Linked HR. I'm also the community chair for Linked HR, which is a mega group on LinkedIn. We have, I think, about, almost 1 million members, maybe 970,000 or something like that on LinkedIn. I direct at Drake the Master of Science in Leadership Development, and Drake is our sponsor for this webinar. Our program has leadership and talent development concentrations. It's very flexible and practical. Practicality is one thing that we really focus on so that people can apply at work what they learned almost immediately. Only 10 courses. You can complete the program in less than 2 years if you take 2 courses at a time. Their course is basically on the people side of leadership. So inspiring others, understanding personalities, understanding how to build a team, leading change, and so on. And it's designed for working adults. So our courses are on Friday nights and Saturdays, and many of our courses are also offered online. So that's the shameless plug for my program, of which I'm very, very proud. And now I have the honor to introduce my colleague in crime in this program, Dr. Augusta Yetunde-Olor. She is the executive director from the consulting firm Savayer. Augusta, welcome. And now I'll let you introduce yourself too.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Actually, someone wants to see the faces that you make. I think that is quite funny. But anyway, it's wonderful being here, and I am currently the executive director of Savayer, which is a relationship management company that is based in California. Up until now, I have been the chair of the Department of Social Work. So my background is in social work at Babcock University, where I'm an associate professor. Also, up until December, I was the director for the Student Support Services. So we had to deal with a very rich culture of clients, even though it is in the African region, West African region, but so diverse when it comes to different people. So so right now I direct the Savayer and just having fun with everyone. So
okay. Thank you, Augusta. And here's a funny story. I just realized that I had forgotten to mute myself, so sorry for the little clicks. Here's a funny story. Augusta and I haven't known each other for too long, and we've never seen each other in person. We've only met virtually and by phone. And actually, we met through the matchmaking services of Augusta's son. I was in a diversity training program in Dayton, Ohio, where her son lives, and then he said, "Oh, you totally need to meet my mom." So that's how we met. And for the participant who wanted to know what faces I make, I was making a funny face right now. Okay. So moving on, just a little bit more of logistics. If you want to know where the materials are, please go to my academic webpage, professorwildermuth.com. And if you go to resources and webinar materials, the PDF file should be in there. And tomorrow we should have the recording in there. So it takes a while for it to render. So yes, we are recording in case you want to share this with some of your colleagues. The reason that I have this kitchen conversation in there, you may have noticed this already, but we try not to keep this too formal. We don't have a script. We're not reading from anywhere. We're going from what we know. And of course, that means that in the recording, we're going to have lots of ums and ahs and imperfections. But that's just the way we like it, because let's face it, a webinar in which you're listening to somebody with a monotone voice read some textbook is horrendously boring. Somebody asked for the web address again, and it is professorwildermuth.com. But then from there, you need to go to, let me go here before. I can't seem to come back, I'm sorry. But if you go to professorwildermuth.com and you go to Leadership Series, you should see where the webinar materials are. Okay, and in the same vein, we also we want to keep you interactive, and so there will be opportunities for polls and also opportunities in which we'll ask you to share your thoughts directly. You have two ways to share your thoughts. You can share your thoughts by just entering a chat just to the panelists, and if you do that, then just Augusta and I are going to see it, and then one of us can say, hey, there's a participant who said such and such, but we wouldn't share your name. If you share it with everybody, it's likely that they will actually see your name. So use your judgment on that, depending on what it is that you're sharing. And how many of you, I'm curious if you could raise your hands, how many of you are interested in the SHRM certification number? Just want to have a sense. So those of you who don't have any idea what that is, don't worry about it. It's something for human resource professionals in the US. We are, Drake University is a recertification provider, so we do have the number, but considering the requirements of SHRM, we provide the number at the end of the webinar. Also within 24 hours, you should expect a letter in your name saying, hey, thank you so much for participating in the webinar, and then you can keep that for your records. So thank you for that. And in terms of a roadmap, folks normally like to know what it is that we're going to be doing. So we're going to be talking about engagement and cultural competence, right? So the first we have to define our terminology. So we'll talk about what engagement means, what engagement looks like in terms of behavioral, how does it show like in the workplace, I guess. What does psychological safety mean? Because psychological safety is the concept within engagement that most connects to cultural intelligence and cultural comfort at work. Of course, now that we're talking about culture, we have to once again define our terminology, and then we'll discuss intersections between the two. We'll share real stories from our own experience, and we'll also ask you all to share your own real stories. And then, of course, time for action. We always like to keep quite a bit of flexibility in our webinars. If we don't get to the very end, that's by design. And the reason I say this is that it would be very easy for us to plan our time exactly if we were reading. But if we are inviting you guys to participate, we want to prioritize your participation over our going through every single slide. So just a heads up, if we don't go through something or skip something, that's why. With that said, any questions that you send us, I'm going to be able to download those chats, share them with Augusta, so that if there are any questions that are left unanswered, we can answer them later on. Also, feel free to send either of us an email at the end of the program if you have any questions that you feel you would like us to share. And I think, Augusta, you're on. And this time I'll remember to mute myself.
Thanks, Chris. So why are we doing this actually? Is there any relevance to real life? Well, here in the United States, there's this projection that by the year 2044, we're going to have more than 50% of the American population that will actually be non-white from different races and ethnicity. So yeah, next slide will show us the demographics as we have it. So Chris, if you could just show the next slide, what is happening in other parts of the world. Would like to know that, but from what you can see, from 1980, the population of the non-white, that is the non-dominant races, has been increasing, and by the year 2044 we are looking at over 50%. So what that is saying, that our workplaces, the next person in our cubicles will probably be looking more different than what we have right now. So we probably would like to know what's happening in your part of the world. Is that something that is relevant to you as well? Just let us know. So next.
So the question now is for you all to share your thoughts using the chat feature on what is happening to demographics in your region, because we could have people from not only different parts of the United States, but we could have colleagues from pretty much all over the world. So if you have anything special to say, you can enter in the chat, and then whichever of us is not speaking, we'll take a look at what you're saying and summarize to everyone else.
Sure.
Shall I go on in the meantime?
I think so.
Next slide?
Yes, I think so.
Which, by the way, I have no idea if the next slide is yours or mine. Oh, it is mine. Okay. All right. So we promised that we would share what engagement is and start with our terminology. So what do we mean by engagement? Engagement basically means a deep connection between the person and the work. So between who you are and what you do. And when I make presentations on engagement, I like to ask people if they can imagine some famous folks. So for example, Michael Phelps, can you imagine him without swimming? Can you imagine Meryl Streep, one of my favorite actresses? Can you imagine her without acting? Or can you imagine Yo-Yo Ma without playing his cello? It's, for me, by now, I cannot imagine myself without being a professor. In other words, being a professor has become part of my identity. So engagement is a very high bar. It's not just that you like your job. In fact, I think I have a slide coming up that discusses what engagement is not. So let's focus first on what it is. It is that deep connection between who you are and what you do. So considering that very high bar of engagement, the difference between who you are and what you do, we're next going to launch a quick poll on how engaged you feel. But perhaps before that, Augusta, maybe you could share, are you reading anything of what people are saying in terms of demographics in their part of the world?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm reading here from Canada. In a way, it's saying that, indigenous realities is a huge thing in Canada. We're having even gender diversity. Someone is talking about having more women, that women are actually underrepresented in software engineering. The public school system, we're saying what that is saying, growing number of races in the public school system, Midwest in the US. So we're having quite a response that is confirming the need for diversity, awareness, and cultural competence. Yes, Chris. So yeah, our participants are responding. Yeah.
So thank you. So in the meantime, folks are beginning to respond to the poll. So the poll, as I said before, is anonymous, so your names don't show. So if you're totally disengaged, it's completely okay for you to say that. Keep in mind my definition. It is a high bar because it has to do with feeling very connected with what you do. And by the way, sorry for the typo on number 4. It is engaged and not for engage or whatever the heck I meant by that. And once we have, I usually wait until I have about 70% of people who vote. So let's see where we are. We're almost there. And if, by the way, guys, whenever I show a vote, sometimes when people are speaking on the phone or they're connected with others, they can't vote. Feel free to send your answer through the webinar chat, and then I'll be able to see it that way. Okay, so I think enough people have voted that we can end the polling and share the results. So it seems like 59% of you said that you are engaged, but it varies all the way from totally disengaged to totally engaged. You may have seen statistics by Gallup organization. Gallup organization is, by the way, I have absolutely nothing to do with them, so I can talk about them pretty freely. They are very well known for their engagement research. I was just checking their latest results today. It seems like it hasn't changed that much, even though engagement is somewhat on the rise. It's about a third in the US, but it varies from country to country or from part of the world to part of the world, which is something we can talk about later. But just so that you can have a little preview, in worldwide, the engagement is at about 15%. Western Europe, however, seems to be at 10% versus 30% of Americans, give or take. Eastern Asia, about 6%. And in the website afterwards, what I'll do is I'll put the link so that you guys can have access to that report and see what it is that I'm seeing. Okay, I have shared the results already, right, Augusta? I think you're muted.
Yes, yes, yes.
I have.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
And we do have others who responded in the charts, you know, so we're pretty much close with having about 40% or maybe a little more who feel very engaged, quite engaged. So just to let you know.
Okay. And one thing that you may want to know, I do not know if you all are, how many of you are managers? You could just raise your hands if you are a manager, a supervisor, you have other people under you, and many of you are there. And in general, managers tend to have higher engagement. And the higher you are in the organization, the higher the engagement tends to be. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The next question here that you could answer in the chat is, remember that I said that engagement means that you feel that being you and your job are deeply connected. And what I mean by your job is not necessarily the organization where you work, but what it is that you do. So is there anything that feels so much like part of you that you couldn't imagine not doing it? Like for me, it is being a professor. Augusta, what is it for you?
Well, I think one big part of me is my spirituality. I can't imagine myself not being able to not be spiritual. Okay,
got it. So for everyone else in the audience, is there anything that you can think of that you cannot imagine not doing? And I'm already reading here somebody saying advocacy work, for example, or not working in HR or being a parent. I can totally relate to that. Not being married to my husband of 24 years, a shout out to you.
That's right.
I've been married for 27, so it can be done. Running, helping others. This is cool. Writing. Okay. Supporting people. So thank you for that. So that kind of gives you a sense of what engagement means. Somebody said being involved with global mobility and helping and motivating others. So thank you for those ideas on what engagement is. Now, I promised you that I would share with you also what engagement is not, because sometimes it's easier to understand what something means by thinking of what something is not. Engagement is not work ethic. Oftentimes I see that in surveys, and I see people talking about engagement as if it simply meant that it's a good employee who shows up on time and does the work. And it's perfectly possible for you to have very strong work ethic and to be an excellent employee and to be entirely disengaged. It's not job satisfaction, because job satisfaction could relate to lots of factors, including whether you're well paid and have good benefits. In fact, if you're very well paid and have very good benefits, you could be one of those totally disengaged people who absolutely will not leave. You have left inside, but you have not left from the outside. And finally, engagement does not mean success or competence, because there are lots of factors that involve success or competence, and you can be, for example, successful and competent and not feel that that job is a part of you. A typical question that sometimes I ask people is, what would you do if you won the lottery? In the absence of any significant constraints, right? Like leaving aside things such as, well, I have to take care of my kids or whatnot. But under normal conditions, if you won the lottery, would you continue doing some of the work that you're deeply engaged doing, or would you completely abandon it? And if the answer is I would completely abandon it and I would do something totally different, that could tell you that who you are and what you're not doing are not so intrinsically connected that you can't imagine yourself doing something else. So as you can tell from my definition, engagement is such a high bar that I'm frankly highly suspicious when I hear that in the US, a third of the employees are engaged. I find that number way too high. Okay, now the other thing that I wanted to make sure that we got right is that according to research, I'm thinking specifically of a researcher called Alan Sachs, and I can put the reference in the page afterwards. There's a difference between organizational engagement and work engagement. So you could be engaged in the organization because that basically is described as feeling very proud of your organization, sharing your organization values, and saying good things about your organization, but you could be disengaged at the job. In other words, oops, I shouldn't have moved so fast. In other words, you like where you are, you are proud of where you are, you feel very connected to the values of your organization, but you're doing the wrong thing. And vice versa. You could be very engaged in what you're doing, but really hate where you are and feel that that the values of your organization do not match you. And when that happens, obviously you could be a very productive person and a flight risk. Any important questions that I missed when I was presenting over here, Augusta?
There's a question about if being happy at work is the same thing as being engaged. There's a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question because, of course, it depends on what we mean by being happy at work. If it means being satisfied, that's kind of a dangerous thing to equate to engagement because there are 1,000 reasons why I would be satisfied, and they could mean simply salary, benefits, and so on. Happy, that's a difficult question to answer. I frankly, because my mind is going in 1,000 different directions, I have not personally looked at research on happiness and engagement. If I were to come up with a guess on whether there's a correlation between happiness and engagement, I would say probably there is one, even though I can't give you exact citations. But is it the same thing? No, especially because some people have the personality tendency to be happy, or the spiritual tendency to be happy, or there are other things that are making them happy that do not necessarily mean that what they're doing is equated to who they are.
Yeah, I think the question actually is, would it be a consistent goal to say that you want to create a work environment where people are happy? So one of our participants is saying that, so if you want to create an environment where everybody is happy, does that necessarily equate to being engaged? Which is what we're trying to, wrestle with and find out. But I'm also thinking that happiness has to be defined. What do we mean by happy? Because it's an emotion that can look like other things, like you have said. It could be satisfied, it could be contented, it could be that I just feel safe and I belong here. So I think it's a matter of defining what do we mean by happiness. And once again, culture is going to come there, because it's like, what does happy mean for X and what does happy mean for Y? So how can you create an environment where X and Y can be happy?
Yep. I guess you ask two professors a question like that, and we go immediately to what's the operational definition of happiness. We can't answer the question simply. All right. So what does engagement look like when you say somebody is engaged? We already said what it doesn't look like, right? So often various researchers, they may use different terminology, but they often talk about the energy that you spend at work. William Kahn talks about physical energy. Will Marshall Felley talks about vigor. But it basically means, are you spending all your energy or most of your energy in the work at hand, or are you spending your energy elsewhere? The second component is focus. Are you putting your cognitive focus? So that's why Kahn calls it cognitive engagement. Are you putting most of your focus in the work, or while you're working, you're distracted by something else going on? And finally, passion, which I guess would be the most connected to the concept of happiness or the concept of liking. That's why one of the participants said, perhaps it's necessary but not sufficient, and I would agree with that. It's that the happiness is part of the equation, it's just not a synonym of it. Okay, so in this particular webinar, we're focusing on what we call energy wasters. Are you spending your energy perhaps worrying about being misunderstood, perhaps worrying about your cultural persona not being accepted? And if you're wasting energy on that, that's energy that you're not spending on engagement. So that's one of our principal points here. So what are the psychological conditions that are connected to engagement or that lead to engagement? The first one is meaningfulness, which means feeling valued and valuable, having a sense that you matter. The next one is availability of resources. And note that when I say resources, I'm talking about both emotional and physical resources to perform your job duties. If I'm spending a lot of my emotional capital worrying about being misunderstood, that's taking away from my resources. And finally, I put this one last because we're going to focus more on it. And that is the concept of psychological safety. Psychological safety basically means that it's okay to be you. I don't have to spend a lot of my energy, once again, that word, worrying about not being me or pretending to be somebody else, or pretending that, in my case, I'm originally from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and it doesn't matter how many years I'm in the US, I still carry that culture with me. Am I trying to hide part of that culture to show up as a professional in the workplace? Are there parts of being a Rio de Janeiro woman that make me seem unprofessional in the US? And am I spending time hiding that piece of me? And if I'm spending time hiding a piece of me, then it's no longer okay to be me. And by definition, there's no psychological safety. So there's a very brief poll that we have in here. Let me see if I can make this work. And that is on psychological safety. So the poll is, how safe does it feel to be you at work? And we're not only talking about culture. We're talking about culture, personality, identity, gender identity, sexual orientation. In any part of your identity that is important to you, is it safe for you to express it? And let's see what our audience says. Oh, I just noticed in the chat, Augusta, that there's somebody who is a Brazilian Canadian from Brasilia. Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, compatriot. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, which if I spoke Portuguese, you would be able to tell right away. Because my accent is atrocious as far as Rio de Janeiro accent. All right, let's see. We have almost everybody has voted, so please do. And here we go. I'll end the polling now and share the results. And it looks like people feel fairly safe. 61% of them do. 6% hardly ever safe, 10% fairly unsafe, and 23% very safe. Okay, thank you for that. And let's moving on. Okay, and that's if you want to continue sharing on the chat, if you ever felt that it was not okay to be you, and if you could give examples, and at that point, if you want to talk about something that happened before so that you don't, talk about your current job, or you can also talk just to the panelists, and then I would not share your name. So if there's anything that you want to share, I think I'm going to pass the baton to Augusta pretty soon, but you can continue writing, and then in the appropriate moment, I'll share some of what you said. Augusta, it is you now, right?
I guess we're just going to tie this together in terms of that. I think you can speak to this.
This
Chris?
one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's just to wrap up that little piece, and that is to say that when you have lack of safety and when you're trying to pretend not to be you in the workplace, that's an energy waster. I'm wasting time worrying about whether my clothes are professional enough from US American Midwestern perspective instead of thinking about the work that I'm doing as a professor. I knew you were coming anytime soon.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So putting it all together now, meaningfulness, that is the sense of being valued, and then having both emotional and physical resources available, and then that sense of safety, that we feel comfortable that with who we are. That is what gives us that transition. And if you would just click, Chris, that is what gives us that transition that takes us from just being in a workplace to the workplace. Okay, because it says that we have value. It means that we are persons and not just numbers or paper in the office. Next, Chris. So with all said, so who is responsible for engagement? Is it the organization? Uh, how does engagement happen? And what we have seen is that employee engagement cannot be forced. It's a decision that each person, each employee has to make to either engage or not engage. However, we can have organizations that create an environment where engagement is motivated and people can choose to engage. And that is one of the things that we're hoping that as a result of this webinar, we'll have managers who are able to, create that environment where that is possible. Next slide. Thank you. So we're now in the arena of the person. We see it as being important that when we're in the workplace, that we are respected and seen as people who have emotions, who have values, who are, husbands and wives, and not just um, objects that are there to perform the job. Okay. And in the social work um, arena, we talk about the person in the environment. That is, the environment has its way of modifying and impacting how a person chooses to express themselves. So, in this context of workplace, we're now looking at the person in the workplace. And that is where culture actually now comes in. That is the person that is coming to work. What is their cultural personhood? So next. So what is culture then? We probably have different definitions, but we will stay with this simple one. That's it. It's the totality underlined of being, the pattern of the way of life passed on from generation to generation. And there was part of the definition or the psychological aspect of engagement by Kahn when it talks about the preferred self, bringing your preferred self to work. So when it comes to culture, culture is a big part of that preferred self. And one of our participants had said something that it is the truth, the essence of who we are. And I really, really like that. Next slide. So, talking
Just
about, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just before I go to the next slide, I just wanted to very quickly talk about some of the things that people said in terms of not bringing the person to work and how that may impact psychological safety. So I heard people talking about fear-based cultures. I read people talk about organizations that were in which there was so much power. People had to worry so much about people in power that brought fear and that brought judgment between people. I'm just trying to see here what else folks said. Other things that people brought in terms of identity was gender, being a woman, cultural religion. I'm thinking it's interesting because people talked about religious identity and the importance of religion and how not bringing that part of the person, bringing back what you were saying, Augusta, to work can generate feelings of lack of safety. Did you see anything else in there?
Yeah. And someone is talking about being Black,
Mm-hmm.
so not just about that, it's actually being a Black man in a
Mm-hmm.
white-led organization, how that brings in being guarded, because of how that is being perceived. So I'm thinking that as we go on, we're going to address this. We're not going to have one solution that fits all, but at the end of the day, we're going to have maybe guidelines or maybe just some attitudes and values that hopefully will help us to feel safer
Mm-hmm.
in bringing, and I think it also has to do with mutual respect, so it's not just about me bringing my culture or my preferred self, but also respecting somebody else. But I think it's just having an environment where each person can feel safe and, respect each other in who we are.
And if I can add on to that, the whole summary of what we've been talking about before is Augusta, I believe, was talking about the idea of a person. It's a person in the workplace. It's not a machine. It's not, right. So you have to think of the totality of that person. And anytime that part of that personhood is being taken away or is being hidden, almost by definition, you don't have engagement because the psychological safety is going to go away and people are going to be spending energy trying to deal with that safety instead of dealing with that work at hand. Does that connect to what you were saying, Augusta?
Yes, yes. And, one of our participants is also bringing something that we both can relate to, that is how psychological safety is compromised for an immigrant, you know, within being in a workplace and not understanding the hidden rules, and I can relate to that, not knowing how you say things, what are the expectations, just because you are an immigrant coming from a different culture. And I think the issue of resources comes in here, having things well articulated and, the policies well explained and communicated. So, and I think it's part of what we're going to be talking about. So we need to move right along. We are our time
Okay.
going.
All right. So in terms of culture, also the other a metaphor that we wanted to share. You may have heard of Geert Hofstede. In fact, a few have heard of him. raise your hand. That's an easy way for people to participate too. Geert Hofstede, if you have not heard of him, don't worry about it. His name is there, and I will put his webpage on the bibliography as well. And Geert Hofstede is a very famous interculturalist. He has some very interesting work. And one of the metaphors that he uses to describe culture is that culture is like the software that is added to the hardware of human beingness. So human nature would be the hardware. We all cry, we all mourn our loved ones, we all fall in love. There are things that we all have in common, right? But the software is what is added on after or as we grow up in a particular culture. This metaphor of the iceberg is very well known, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It just suffices to say that oftentimes we ignore pieces that are under the iceberg that have to do with culture, such as values and beliefs and taboos. What is it that you can't talk about? And heroes notice that that's getting more to the surface. And then above the surface, symbols and behaviors and expressions of behavior. What people oftentimes don't understand is that those behaviors, those expressions, those symbols, for example, the clothes you wear or some piece of jewelry or or whether you need to wear the hijab at work or not, or whether there's a religious head covering of some sort. Those are not by themselves. They are expressions of values and beliefs that are underneath the surface. So you can't, these things all go together. It's just that we only see some of them. Hofstede also talks about what he refers to as our cultural default. Just like the default of, I don't know, the software that you're using, Word, there's a default, there's a font that is also always going to be used unless you change it. Culture is often something that we do not see. We get so used to it that it doesn't cross our mind. It's not something that we think about. Because we don't think about, we can very easily judge someone based on our own cultural background. Somebody mentioned, for example, performance appraisals. Performance appraisals are made based on cultural practices that are accepted within particular organizations and particular countries, and particular not even countries, but social classes and ethnic groups within that country, where, well, those rules under which you're being judged could be your own cultural defaults, but not the cultural defaults of the person whom you're judging. I think that's you again, Augusta.
Yeah, so this now helps us to understand that there is a difference between workplace culture, which is how a particular organization runs itself, what kind of emotional climate is in that organization, what is a communication pattern, that is workplace culture, as opposed to culture in the workplace. That is how much do employees and members of that organization, how are they able to express themselves or feel comfortable with who they are in their workplace or at their workplace. And of course, the workplace culture also impacts culture in the workplace. So if we have an environment that is very caustic and very demeaning, as the environment, the emotional environment of the job, definitely it's going to affect culture in the workplace. So we just wanted to bring that difference in terms. So next slide, please, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's time to tell our stories, and share, how some of these things have impacted us individually, and also you're welcome to do that. I'm going to just jump right in. Chris showed that iceberg about how there are things, expressions on the surface that actually have underlying meanings that people may not know. I remember when I was coming to the United States from Nigeria, I made up my mind that I was going to be called by my name that everybody knows me by, Yetunde, 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 and it has a meaning, because I loved what it meant, and I would say what it means, So I got to the US and started working, and of course, the first thing is, who are you? What is your name? And I will say, oh, my name is Yetunde. And people were like, what? Yes, what? Yes, And it was so hard that some people would just say, oh, you know what? Can we just call you Mary? Or, and at that moment, my head was like, what? Because the meaning of Yetunde to me is mother is back. And that name was given to me by my father, who lost his mom and he never knew his mother. So right after he was born, and we have this tradition or culture that says that when you give birth to a child who is in the gender of a parent that died, they believe that that parent came back. So they kind of just believe that, oh, this little girl is mother who has come back. So even though I don't believe that personally all the way, my name is my connection with my grandmother. So when someone says, oh, can we just call you some other name? It's like, we just got rid of my grandmother, and it's like, oh no, you can't do that, But so now coming to work and having to figure out, what am I even going to be called? Or if I'm being called by a name that doesn't have any essence to me, right there is a distraction. It is something that I have to think about. So whereas I'm at a meeting where we're going to be talking about some strategic planning, and someone says something and they don't say Yetunde, of course I'm like, okay, oh, they're talking about me. Okay, I'm supposed to talk, but that is not me. So it is a time waster in the mind. It is the mind space. There's distraction, and I always feel so comfortable, like Chris, when you really try to know that, how do I say your name right? I felt valued. I felt welcomed in who I was, and I felt centered. So I don't know if you have something else, Chris, that you want to share about how you had to deal with those discrepancies in the workplace and your culture.
Yes, absolutely. I was kind of smiling here because actually my daughter, when she shared her name, which is also my mother's name, it comes from my mother, she was asked, why did your parents give you that long name? So I was relating to what you were saying. For me, one wild awakening as I came to the US was going to job interviews. Because in Brazil, the way that I was raised and my own cultural background, thou shalt not brag was the 11th commandment. You're not supposed to brag. You're not supposed to say that you're some big person. So when I would go to interviews, and I remember one particular question in which I was asked, are you 100% sure that you're going to be productive the very first day if you come to work? And what I'm thinking is, of course I'm not 100. I mean, my answer was, I'm 100% confident I'm not going to be 100% confident in the first day. And to me, that question didn't even make sense. And as I was preparing for interviews and I was asked to practice answering all sorts of questions about my strengths, it was so darn uncomfortable to talk about my strengths. Somebody else was supposed to notice them. And then when somebody kept telling me, hey, in the US, you need to sell yourself and you need to be confident. So then I started overdoing it, and all of a sudden I'm perceived as arrogant. And after 27 years, I can tell you, I still don't know how to do this. I'm still totally confused as to whether I'm supposed to sell myself or not. And Augusta, do you want to share the conversation we were having just before we started?
Oh.
I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, this happened right as we're preparing for this webinar. Yesterday we tried to do a dry run and make sure that everything was working, and things, of course, were not working. We wanted to see how we could go on Facebook and have it done Facebook Live, and we started getting stressed and fluttered. Now, for me, in my person, when things are not going well, the next thing for me to do is pray, just praying, helps me to be at peace, maybe not necessarily for any other thing. So my first instinct was to say, you know what, Chris, I need to pray, or we need to pray. But because I did not feel safe enough to say that, I did not want to come off as offensive to Chris, because I didn't know her that well. So while she was saying, oh, we need to do this, oh, let's check on this, in my head, I decided to pray in my head, which was a distraction, because now I had to be praying in my mind while at the same time I'm trying to focus on the task, and it was so draining for me. And this morning I had to say, Chris, you know what we're talking about actually happened, and how energy is just wasted when we don't feel safe in expressing our preferred self on the job. Probably what would have helped me if I was courageous enough to say, you know what, Chris, I need to take time out now and just help myself refocus and then do whatever. It doesn't mean that Chris and I have to pray together. It just means that I needed to be given that space to do what I needed to do to be whole on the job.
And while all this is happening to you today, what's happening to me is that I didn't feel comfortable telling her that from a personality standpoint, I'm a rather nervous Nelly. I tend to worry a heck of a lot. Those of you who know personality terminology, emotional stability or neuroticism is another one word. Mine is very, very high. I tend to stress very easily. So at that moment, I was experiencing total panic, and I didn't feel comfortable to tell her that. And while I was panicky, and you didn't want to tell me that you wanted to pray, I didn't want to tell you that I was panicky. And we were both spending our energy trying to pretend that we were not our real ourselves.
So we were so together when we were not.
So somebody asked, why do you call this psychological safety? Psychological safety is a term that was brought in by William Kahn. So I don't know exactly why he chose that particular name. However, one way is to differentiate psychological safety from physical safety. So it's not about being physically safe, it's about being psychologically able to be whole in the workplace. At least that's how the term is often used. And there is anymore a lot of research on psychological safety in the workplace and its relationships to engagement and productivity that can be fascinating. And we move on. We may not, what I'm going to suggest that we do now, oops, I do that all the time. Do I have a poll here? Because polls are fairly fun. Let me see if I can find that. Okay, here we go. So the poll is asking people to say if they have ever had or observed a misunderstanding of culture in their workplace. And let's see what people say about that. And while people are answering, I'm going to ask people, what is the spelling of the person I'm talking about? It's Kahn. K-H-A-N. And don't worry, I will put all those references in the webpage page after we talk. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'm noticing that it's 12:55. So I think what I'm going to do is end the polling. I told you that we would have to do some skipping over here. Here are the results. So people noticed these things several times. Instead of asking people to share their stories now, perhaps Yetunde, what we could do is ask them to share their thoughts in the chat, and then I can summarize them later and share them in a letter to everyone. How about that? Obviously without giving names, just giving people themes.
Yes, yes. And since everyone will have the slides, we can look at what are those things, other concepts, that will make our workplace, culturally competent. We can read up on that, but I mean, the next slide that talks about the connection kind of puts it together that we do need to create.
Sorry.
no problem, that we do need to create that space in our workplace, the cultural space, and respecting the cultural backgrounds of employee communicates that they are valued. And then doing that transitions or also helps our workplaces to be workplace. And according to researchers and this study by Rock, it just says that that fosters engagement. Okay, so go ahead, Chris.
Okay. So that's you, right?
Yeah, well, because of time.
Time, you want me to skip that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that, you know, the whole concept of competence and humility, we can go on to that summarizing slide that talks about
everything.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on, guys. It's not this one, right? It's the next one.
Yeah, that has the
time for action. Yay.
Yeah.
All right. And
Yeah.
by the way, folks, I did investigate some of the connections in the literature between psychological safety and engagement, and between engagement, diversity, and it goes by people's feelings of inclusion. And I'll share those connections there. Mm-hmm. So in terms of actions, it's impossible for you to know about every culture there is, or if anybody has found the trick to that, please do let us know, because we would be interested. And there's no cultural book even for our own culture, let alone for understanding every culture there is. So now what? And Yetunde, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so what this is now saying is that there, to just have this, to keep the dialogue and curiosity going, you know, wherever we are, you know, and having a posture of humility and informed not knowing. That is, yeah, I know some, I'm informed, but I choose to ask and make the other person the expert of their own experience and not judge them by mine. Okay, and then the issue of forgiveness, we're going to step on each other, like we need to release each other from that bind that, you know, okay, if I missed it, like we did yesterday, it's like, you know what, let's talk about it and move forward and do it better next time, you know. So the area of forgiveness and letting go and learning and having a very self-reflective posture, which is what humility is. We're always critiquing ourselves and making sure that, you know, we are examining our own biases.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and a caveat, of course, culture is not the only piece, or cultural understanding is not the only piece of psychological safety, of the psychological safety puzzle. There is personality, there is, there are many other pieces of identity. There are jerk bosses. I don't know. There's a lot more to it. We just are focusing on cultural understanding in this particular webinar. And that takes us to the final words of wisdom here. Don't waste energy. If people are spending energy hiding pieces of their cultural selves, then that's energy that is not being spent on engagement. And with that said, I'm going to skip that, but I'm going to share with you the information from Gallup. This is just a call for future researchers. So if there are researchers in the audience who would like to do some research with me on a comparative review of factors impacting engagement in multiple countries, write me. And drum roll, right on time.
There we go. So please reach out. Also, I'm available to anyone, you know, if you have other questions or how I can support your diversity and, you know, workplace inclusiveness, reach out and we can talk.
Okay, thank you so much, Yetunde. It's been a joy to work with you. Everyone, if you're listening to this on the phone, the number, the activity ID for SHRM is 19W3E62. If you didn't get that, no worries, because you will receive a letter within 24 hours or so confirming your participation in this webinar. And I wanted to thank everybody so much for being here, and thank you, and I hope you come to our next webinar, which, by the way, is going to be Leading a Multi-Generational Workforce. It's taking place on August 21. Once you see this slide on the page, you can just go in there and register for it. All these webinars that we run at Drake University for the community are free, open to the public, and provide SHRM credit. So thank you so much. A big goodbye, a shout out to my colleague, and I hope to, both Yetunde and I hope to hear from you after this conversation. Take care.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye for now.